Hello, everyone. We're back to JNation 2025, and with me is Ben Evans.
Thank
So,
you.
Ben, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. So I am currently, I guess we'll come back to that,
Yeah.
Senior Principal Software Engineer at Red Hat Cloud Native Runtimes, where I am the observability lead, which is an interesting change from what I'm actually talking about at this conference, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So you're known for observability. This is something
Mhm.
that you've been devoting your professional life for the last, what, 5, 6, 7 years?
Yeah, more than that. So if you think of JClarity, our startup, as an observability company, it's actually more like 12
Yeah,
years.
yes, exactly.
So
And you had your session already, which was
not
not
about
about
observability.
observability.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think there's two pieces to this. So my actual session title was is Java 24 a functional programming language? And I've always been interested in language runtimes and the nature of programming languages. So A, it's nice to talk about something different, but B, I think there's something else going on because since I joined Red Hat in 2021, so almost exactly 4 years ago, I have been talking a lot about observability and trying to ensure consistency across all of our products like Quarkus and Wildfly and JBoss and all of the things that we produce to give this sort of unified approach to observability. And that story over the last 4 years has been about customers in particular moving towards especially open telemetry. So I feel like I started giving talks about observability and the rooms were kind of half full and people come in, they're interesting. And over time I can see that customers get more interested in it and they start to converge on this idea of how they want their observability of their systems to work. And so I feel like the message has been spreading gradually with a decent growth rate. But now I feel like I kind of don't even need to talk about it that much anymore. I have been giving, until this year, pretty much the same talk, the state of observability in Java in 2022, 2023. I've been giving that talk a lot. And sure, each time I give it, there are more updates. I can tell more of the story as the open source projects and the standards and the cloud native pieces of it have evolved. So it hasn't stayed still, but it has, the core of it hasn't really changed, although it's evolved over time. But if we look at the program for this year at JNation, there are, I think, 3 or 4 talks about observability. So maybe in a sense it's kind of broken through into the mainstream. I'm very interested to see what other people have to say about it now. I want to see the folks that are working maybe on some things like AI observability, which we're still figuring out, or how they specifically relate it to things within their own areas.
Yeah, because at this time, we have to talk about AI in one way or another, don't we? So you said that you're quite happy with the current state of what it seems to be the approach to talking on observability in conferences. So you chose to go with functional programming, which obviously we've been talking about imperative programming and functional, so many different paradigms for much longer than observability. Why come back to functional?
Well, because I think people have circled around functional for a while, and at the start of my talk, and these three principles that I apply, and I loop back to over the course of the talk, which actually are principles that I largely think about in performance and in many other aspects of software as well. And they are outcomes, not mechanisms. So to give you an example, in Holly's excellent keynote, if you haven't seen Holly's keynote yet, you should go and watch that next.
It's on video.
Where Holly is talking about how the trade-off of application startup time versus throughput. And if you want to achieve quick startup time, people might tell you what you need is AOT compilation. Right? Well, AOT compilation is a mechanism. It's a technical route which leads you to an outcome. The outcome you want is fast startup.
Correct.
Right?
So you can get it in different ways.
Right. So what you need to focus on is to focus on the outcome and not over-rotate onto the mechanism.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. So the question that is relevant for functional programming is, do you actually want functional programming, or is it a mechanism?
Right. So
can you connect directly to the outcome that you're thinking about when you think functional programming? You may think reduce defect rate because things are immutable. Okay, sure. And that is something that you will get with a functional language which has good support for immutability. But that outcome is separate from it being functional programming. And I think one of the things, if I had to say something negative about the functional programming community, is that they do tend sometimes to be overly focused on the functionalness rather than what we actually build as developers and builders.
Correct, which is in a way is similar to when we're doing code coverage, where there are teams that will focus on the number itself rather than on what advantages we can get by just being able to measure code coverage.
Sure, and also you can have 90% or even 95% code coverage if you like, but if what you're covering are the getters and setters and you're not covering the core business logic, that is much less useful than something which only has a 20% code coverage, but it covers the core parts of the system. So, these things are helpful, but you have to, always remember that if you turn something into a metric, somebody's going to try and game it.
Right. So you mentioned mechanisms versus outputs, and where are the other two?
The next question is does it matter? So you can watch the talk online. I think we had a video of it. But basically, Java turns out to be slightly functional. And between Java 17 and where we are today, it is getting additional capabilities and additional technical features which enable more functional programming. So it enables you to move the dial from slightly functional to slightly more functional. But that's all it's doing. But the question is, does that matter? Is that the right amount for developers? Which leads us to the third principle, which is the perfect is the enemy of the good. So is it a perfect functional programming language? No. But what Java is a very practical language. That's been true ever since the start. It's one of the things that's written into Java's DNA, is that this is a language for, I sometimes say it's the language for people who want to deploy a robust business system and go home and see their kids or their partner or their cat or whatever, on the weekend and not worry about it.
So Ben, you mentioned that you are employed by Red Hat right now, and obviously there is a question in people's minds that happened. There was an announcement made in February 2025 that the JBoss division from Red Hat is moving to IBM. So can you share more about this?
Sure. I mean, I do need to say that these are, of course, just my personal takes on things. I'm not speaking for the company here, but with that understanding, then sure. So firstly, as I hope everyone knows, Red Hat has been a division of IBM for quite some time now. So in one sense, nothing's really changing. We're just moving from one different bit of an IBM company to a different bit of another IBM company. And so that's what doesn't change. In fact, it's really just an internal move of staff. But I think people also are potentially concerned, have questions, because IBM, as well as having Red Hat and the open source Java middleware that we have and the other things which we have around it, there is also the IBM middleware, which is not open source. It is proprietary, things like WebSphere and so on. And so people might have questions about how that's going to work together. Actually, those are very separate businesses, and they are very different customers. It might surprise people to know, but in this day and age, even in the year 2025, there are still some companies, and potentially also government departments, I guess, who do not and will not use open source. So they are still buying proprietary middleware because they can't or won't or are regulated in such a way that they can't use open source. So that's why they're a separate market. We, on the Red Hat side, are intending to continue just as we are. I don't think that there's going to be any major changes to my job anytime soon. I also don't expect that for the community perspective that there will be any change at all either. The code is open, it stays open, and the fact that we are arranged slightly differently at IBM is not really that big a change. What I would also say is that in the last year, we have actually taken steps at Red Hat to move some of our projects, which were Red Hat led and very much under Red Hat's banner, out of Red Hat and into open foundations.
Right, exactly. So we have Quarkus, Hibernate, InfiniSpan, and Wildfly at the very least joining the Common House Foundation. And Common House is not the only open source foundation that is out there,
Hmm.
but it's one of the most recent ones.
Yes, and I think that's important because I think it's important to give credit where credit is due. We would not be in the place where we are with open source software and with Java if not for the work that was done at places like Eclipse and Apache. Right, their foundations, they were the trailblazers, but they do come from the 20th century fundamentally, and I think Common House is one of the most interesting and exciting foundations which is being constructed with the way that open source is now in mind. You know, we are not building a foundation which is very top down with Common House. It's very minimal governance, or you know, where you don't have to take a particular model in order to fit into Common House. The ground rules are actually really pretty minimal. I also think it's important that if people want to have a commercial contribution to Common House in the sense of actually sponsoring and putting money in, that they have good control over where that money goes to, which isn't always the case. It's very hard to do that at Eclipse, for example.
Yeah, this is one of the tenets of the foundation. So on disclosure, I'm the maintainer of one of the member projects and also an officer on Common House. So one of the tenets that we have is financial transparent financial responsibility. So if you are a sponsor of any of the projects, or if you're a member, and you want to supply money for one of the projects, you will know exactly how the money goes through. There's nothing shady going on. Everything will be completely out in the open.
Yeah, and I think we need to have that. I think that's extremely important, especially for something which is designed for the whole life cycle of the project. You know, it from once it gets past a certain level of maturity into the main part. You know, if you think about stars and stellar evolution, people talk about the main sequence that a star goes through, and I would say that Common House is a main sequence foundation. It's there for, and then also to deal with the end stages as well. But one of the other reasons which we haven't touched on yet, which I think why I think this is so important, is we have had several instances. I'm not going to go into the details of them, where code which was delivered into a foundation, projects which were there, the company has then changed its mind, or for whatever reason has decided a more business and less open source license was more appropriate, and there have been some pretty ugly battles. I think that harms open source. I actually don't think it does the company that tries those things any good. But what it does do is it makes other people in the community a bit more hesitant, a bit more reluctant to go to a project like Hibernate when it is still sponsored by a vendor.
Yeah.
So by moving things like Hibernate, and Quarkus, and Wildfly, and InfiniSpan into Common House, it takes that away. It takes away that risk that Red Hat will suddenly, we're Red Hat, we don't do that kind of thing, but try to change the licensing model or anything. Once it's in Common House in that way, it literally cannot be done.
Right, so it takes away the fear of the single vendor taking out their toys and say you are no longer welcome here.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen in this case.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I think we can see that. I mean, we saw at MongoDB.
MongoDB did a contribution to Hibernate, exactly, because Hibernate is no longer dominated one single vendor.
Yep. And and I think it works well for projects like Quarkus. Quarkus now has over 1,000 contributors. They're not obviously not all employed by Red Hat, but to have that something where it is, sure, I mean, there's a lot of Red Hat people that work on it because, it's a great project. It's a nice product for us. People think it's cool. We like working on it. So of course the Red Hat people are going to contribute to it. But not only that, the ability to bring in the community and to have strong voices from other parts of the community that aren't Red Hat is, I think, it's one of the great things about Common House.
Exactly. Perfect. So thank you very much for your time, Ben. Is there anything else that you would like to say to the JNation audience?
Well, if you are watching this video, of course, it means that you couldn't be here in person. But I think you should look at your calendar for next year and make sure you have a think whether you can come and join us next year in 26.
All right. Thank you so much, and everybody else for watching.